Let me introduce our guest speaker this morning. Hank Sneed was born and raised in Eastern North Carolina, Wilson, North Carolina. He attended what was then Atlantic Christian College in Wilson. It is now Barton College, where our own Bill Paulsell was teaching years ago at Atlantic Christian College, Barton College. I spent a lot of time in Wilson and in Eastern North Carolina when I was serving First Christian Church in Wilmington, North Carolina. Place to the best barbecue in the country at Wilson's. Parker's there in Wilson, oh my goodness, yes. After his graduation, Hank served for 20 years in the U.S. Air Force. Then went to Lexington Theological Seminary, served as pastor in Winchester, Kentucky at Broadway Christian Church. He served on the regional staff of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Kentucky as a consultant to our African American congregations. And for the past, how many years, Hank, here at Central?
Since 2005.
Since 2005, so 10 years plus 11 years as a member here at Central, where Hank has been an elder. He's currently the chair of our worship ministry area. And our dear brother in Christ, would you please welcome Reverend Hank Sneed.
Good morning. And those of you whose path I have not crossed this morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. As the pastor was describing this place we call Wilson on the eastern seaboard of North Carolina, it's about 45 miles east of Raleigh, which is the capital city. And during my early youth, around the 1950s and 60s, the population of Wilson was around 23,000. In percentages, it was about 47% black and 42.5% white. Wilson was mostly a farming community with a few textiles. My early recognition of the congressional leadership there was persons like Terry Sanford, who was known as the great public educator. And then there was Jesse Hams, the conservative who was a master obstructionist and racist. Wilson was known exclusively as the world's greatest tobacco market because of the many, many tobacco kings that lived in that area, many, many millionaires. All large tobacco companies warehouse their tobacco out of Wilson. Wilson was like any other southern small town during the 1950s, where there were certain mannerisms, certain posturing, and rules that blacks, to include myself, should get used to as a person, such as lines of demarcations, which meant there was a railroad track or highway or a road that separated the black and white communities. And if you knew what was best for you, don't be caught where you shouldn't be after dark or any other time unless you were being employed by someone white. There were posted signs that indicated separation of or denial of access in schools, facilities, schools, books and equipment, stores, utilities, roads and services. You were told and you were taught that you would never be equal or measure up to whites. That because of your color and of your skin, you belong to a subculture. And just for a side note before I began on my journey, I never bought into any of this black so-called culture norms. As I reflect back on in the 50s and the 60s, it was a very interesting time to engage life as change two words, I guess, change and hardship, would identify and describe the country politically, socially, and culturally. My early education began in a little Catholic school because my parents thought maybe I would get a better education there than the public school system there in Wilson. The sisters were very strict, and they taught very well. A lot better than the public schools there in Wilson. My first real experience with racism, besides what I was seeing through my little eyes at 5 or 7 years old, and especially when I saw people walking down the street who did buy into the subculture by allowing themselves to be inhuman. And what I mean by that is black folk moving off of the sidewalk to allow white persons to pass, or black folk walking down the street with their heads pointed down to the ground, or not looking the person they're having conversation with in the eye. So one day I was with my mother, and I don't know why I was out of school, and she had to go to the courthouse to get some papers signed. And she took me along, and she placed me in the lobby of the courthouse, and they had these long benches. And so I took a little car along with me to play with. And she went inside the courtroom, and I decided to get down on the floor to play with my car. And while down on the floor playing, I became thirsty. So I got up and went to the water fountain. And then I heard this loud voice, "N-word, boy!" I was startled by the sound. But let me say something first about this N-word, boy. The N-word to me is one that is most degrading. It's a word that cuts me to the core. Some black folk find it as a word of endearment. And many in my family use this word, but they don't use it around me. To me, it signifies something less than what God intended. And my belief is that God intended for all of creation was good. So the N-word, boy, don't you know better? Here's this person coming through the lobby, and he has a badge and a gun and in a uniform, and he grabs me by the arm and he drags me down the lobby to another water fountain, and he said, "This is where your kind is supposed to drink." And after I finished drinking, I was curious about what was the difference in the two fountains. The water tasted the same. And so as I slowly walked back to the bench where I was sitting, I noticed the two pipes, one from the other, one water fountain, and the pipe from the fountain that I was drinking from. They met at the center of the hallway, and they went into the wall. Interesting. When my mother came out to get me, the officer yelled at my mother, "Hey, girl, you better teach that boy of yours what fountain he's supposed to drink out of." Well, it was a heck of a discussion on the way home. And I tried to have some headway in the discussion, but she only understood that I disobeyed her. She had gotten yelled at by a white man. So now I'm confused. I'm confused by what I had been taught at the Catholic school and as well as my church. I had observed something that I thought was wrong and evil. And why was it wrong for me to question what I felt and what I saw? And I realized something about myself at that time, that even though I knew that I was going to get a whipping for disobeying my mother, yet I refused to give up my principle that something was wrong, that black folk and white folk were drinking out of different water fountains because of the color of their skin, even though the water came from the same source. It just didn't make sense to me. So by the end of the 5th grade year, my parents indicated that we could no longer afford to send you to that Catholic school. You're going to public school. Whereby I never saw a book that didn't have at least 4 or 5 names in it from the white school. But we still had to pay rental fees for the book. So as a teen, I struggled with my relationship with God. I struggled with racism, and I struggled with Vietnam, and I struggled with the negative images and struggles of the civil rights movement. I had questions that my parents could not give me answers to. I would ask my granny, and she would say, well, son, just keep your hand in the master's hand. Whatever that meant. Because I didn't know what she was talking about. What master? Questions I had in my mind. Why would God allow black folk to suffer under American slavery for some 400 years? Why would a people have to fight for rights declared by the Constitution that governs the country they live in? If God was all-knowing and all-powerful, why doesn't God do something about the war in Vietnam and stop all the young men from dying? Why would God allow George Wallace in Alabama to deny people from getting an education? Why are black people having to suffer politically and socially and economically in this country? Why are black folk being hung? Why there's no justice for black folks except for jail or prison? Why does God allow Jesse Helms, the greatest conservative who has a master obstructionist and racist, control the lives of so many people and boast about his power over them? And the Bible added to the confusion. The 1950s and 60s was disturbing because there were so many synonyms lumped with some of the biblical stories of the Old Testament. But there stood a man who felt my pain. He heard my cry. He understood my fears and disgust for living as a black youth with Christian values, living in an environment that stretched me beyond my years. Reverend O.J. Hawkins, a Presbyterian minister, my rescuer, a gentle soul, a great communicator, very sensitive to my needs. So we're able to see that there was something different about me. He noticed that I didn't look at the surface of the matter, but I tend to search deep to find the deeper meaning, the deeper understanding of the subject matter. And just as much as he supported me, he challenged me. He challenged me to understand that some things just take time. And I'm still an impatient man. He challenged me to put patience into me being and just stop assigning blame. And basically he wanted me to look at my relationship with God and stop blaming God for the misdeeds of man. And he pushed me to not take things so literally. Until this day, the Psalms provide a great source for me. Psalms 3, Psalms 13, where the psalmist is asking the generational question, Lord, how long? 1964-65, I joined the U.S. Air Force, did the basic training thing, was waiting for opening at Jet Mechanics Technical School. And during this time in the Air Force, there was no enlistment guarantee aptitude test program for you. You know, so you sit there after basic waiting, you get an opening in tech school. And after a week pass, sergeant walks in and gives you new orders, a new AFC, and send you on your way. Because at that time, whatever the needs of the Air Force were, that's where you went, regardless of what your scores were. It was 40 of us, 15 African Americans out of the 40. The 15 African Americans that went to food service or to roads and grounds. And the white airmen went to skilled positions. After I arrived at my first duty assignment, after about 6 months, I was concerned that after 2 promotion cycles, my name had not appeared on the list. So I went to the first sergeant and I explained to him my concern. He did not give me a viable explanation, except, well, that's just the way it is. But I said, sir, doesn't the commander decide who gets promoted? Yep, that's true. Then, sir, may I make an appointment with the commander? It's your skin. I knew this was a gutsy call, but how could I find out why? And it could be misconstrued. But I wanted to know. So after a good night's sleep and prayer the next morning, I still felt confident about my actions. So prior to arriving, made sure that my uniform was impeccable. Presented myself to the commander, and I requested permission to speak. His first words were, I don't have a lot of time. My heart dropped, but I went on, sir, I've been here 2 promotion cycles, and I've seen my peers promoted, and I was wondering why I have not been promoted. And he called out to the clerk to bring my academic file. And he looked at it and he said, your scores are great, your performance ratings are high, everything looks great, it just must be an oversight. And then he said, and this is what really took the cake, he said, have you ever been in trouble? Like a DUI or Article 15. And before I could answer, he said, have you ever been in my office for anything? And I replied, no, sir. And I left his office confused. But I realized that many of my peers had had several infractions and had been in his office for several times. He knew their names. But then I thought, what a system of disparity. A week later, the first sergeant called me in, handed me promotion orders, and said begrudgingly, congratulations. From that day forward, I knew I had to be at my military best because I had the audacity to question the first sergeant and the commander about why I had not been promoted. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on Jesus. Oh, I woke up this morning with my mind. 1966, I departed for Vietnam. Heart filled with a lot of pain, a lot of stress, a lot of torment. With a great decision about God, country, commitment, and living with the cruel reality of willing to give my life, in essence, for a majority of people that saw me less than human. But it is amazing the bonds that are made under the smell of death, and how easy they are loosened when folk return to the society of hatred, separatism, racism, bigotry, and the like. 1967-69, Maxwell F. West Base, Alabama. Miserable assignment. After being in Vietnam, not a pleasant place to be, I tried to adjust, but the signs of the deep, deep South and all of its hate and outright evil was in my face constantly, daily. At this point in my career, I had become radicalized on many fronts. I constantly reminded myself by repeating this phrase over and over again: you better get a hold of yourself before you lose yourself. You better get a hold of yourself before you lose yourself. Over and over again. I had to repeat this phrase because if I didn't, with no help from the military, I could have been a basket case. Prayer and prayer and much more prayer. So to help myself feel better, I decided to purchase a new car. During this time in Alabama, purchasing a new car was strange, because at that time they were not a title state, they were a bill of sale state. And I had a friendly cop that would stop me every morning, routinely. Boy, where did you get this car from? Let me see your driver's license. Did you steal this car, or do you have a bill of sale? And this went on 5 days a week, month after month after month. I worked for a local civilian who was in charge of the shop, who was a card-carrying member of the Ku Klux Klan, he was very proud of it. And between my boss and the policeman, they made my day a living hell. A white guy from another unit who had befriended me would come by the house on the weekend And this same policeman who stopped me each morning would come down my street and harass my friend until he forced him to leave. Finally, the day came when the straw broke the camel's back. As usual, I stopped by this regular policeman, but instead of me rolling the windows down, I decided not to roll them down, and I took the bill of sales and my driver's license and placed them against the window. When he got up to the side of my car, he asked for my driver's license and my identification. And I shouted to him, "Sir, can't you read?" That didn't go over very well. He took out his nightstick and he rapped across the top of my car until he chipped the paint, and went back and got into his car and left. I proceeded on to work. And when I got to work, I got out and checked the damage, went to my commander and told him about what happened. And his response was, "You, of all people, should know what the climate down here is like." Thank you. I proceeded downtown to file a claim against the officer and stopped by personnel on the way back and put in my orders for a transfer. In April of '68, Martin Luther King was assassinated, and the turmoil in Montgomery was turned upside down. I did not feel safe in Montgomery, but I felt safe in Vietnam, so I accepted orders to go back to Vietnam. I will trust in the Lord. I will trust in the Lord. When I got back to Vietnam, I tried to reestablish my relationship with God, but I was not quite sure I was authentic due to the stress and the strain of being in a combat arena. And then the night prior to my departure, because I'm not going to tell you what happened while I was there. During the night prior to my departure from Vietnam, I stopped by the canteen to wish some of the guys farewell and finish my final packing. And as I was leaving, I could hear a couple guys behind me as I was walking away. And suddenly I heard one of them say, "You know what? I always wanted to kick an N-word, A-word." I said to myself, "Oh, I don't need this." So I increased the pace of my steps. And as I increased my pace, so did they. And then all of a sudden I felt this jerk by my collar. Next thing I found myself on the ground, and then I felt these boots kicking me. And somehow my hand grasped this pipe, because I found myself by the motor pool, and we had pipes that we used to use as braking bars, that we used to brake lugs on the vehicles. And after one swing with that pipe, I cleared some space, and the rest was history. After a slight delay of a few months, I finally got home. While waiting to come home, I made some promises to God with some good intentions. But I faltered when I returned to the States, that God would not leave me alone. Thomas Paine said, "The real man smiles in trouble, gathers strength from distress, and grows brave by reflection. 1972, God was still tugging at me. But I wasn't ready yet. There was still some internal anger for the Air Force, society, and God. Because I saw all three as part of a system which I had no control of whatsoever. But for me, I still believe life was good. I purchased my first home. A military friend of mine who eventually became my neighbor. We purchased our homes around the same time, the same subdivision, on the same street. Matter of fact, I didn't even know anything about it. He brought the information to me about the possibilities of being a homeowner. And after settlement, we were very proud of our accomplishments. Returning vets, settling down with families. Months down the road, he was curious about what my house payment was. And then he confided in me that he was having trouble making his house payment. And I said, you got to be kidding. We're the same rank, same size house. We draw the same income. Maybe you're just not budgeting your money properly. To make a long story short, we compared contracts, and this is what I found. He got a lower interest rate than I put down $5,000 down, he put down none. We used the same realtor. My realtor charges were greater than his. He had turbo credit. I had excellent credit. And the list went on and on and on. And after seeing this, I was devastated. But I never expressed it to him. I could only express my gratitude to him and to God for pointing me in the direction towards home ownership. I worked with him to show him how valuable it was to have a home budget and how to account for his household spending. Until this day, we are still friends. But I also remember the valuable lesson and a reminder about the world I still live in, societal and spiritual. Societal norms may have penalized me economically, but spiritually I learned through faith that what God has for you is for you, and no one can take that away. Norman Vincent Peale says, no matter how dark things seem to be, or actually are, raise your sights and see the possibilities. Always see them, for they are always there. 1986. I conceived, I gave up the struggle, and I announced my call to ministry. What a relief. But listen how this happened. A friend of mine was planning and organizing for a youth Sunday. Friday before youth Sunday, I get a call from him, and he's in a panic mode. And he tells me that the speaker that he had arranged became ill and could not be able to come. He was in a bind. He didn't know what he was going to do. And then he suggested that I do something. And I told him, I am not a public speaker. And after hearing him bemoaning for about 30 minutes or more, I decided, okay, I'll do something, okay? I don't know what I'll do, but I'll do something. Put a message together and do a little deliberate. Something came over me. And then I knew. The next Sunday, I announced my call to ministry, and I enrolled at Atlantic Christian College in Wilson. And then I knew how to sing that song. Oh, how I love Jesus, because he first loved me. In 1990, I heard the call that said, go west, young man, go west to Lexington, Kentucky. to Lexington Theological Seminary. Oh, I was so excited to get that call. And all sorts of thoughts were running through my mind. And the one thought that captured my mind and body and spirit was the thought of being part of a beloved community. Sort of thinking like Paul. Everyone basically was on the same page. Wrong. When I arrived at the seminary was in the process of going through or preparing for accreditation. The use of the pronoun to identify God was big on campus. And the seminary had its largest contingency of African American students attending at one time. 14. As everyone who has attended seminary knows that it's a transition, it's an adjustment, it's doubt, it's struggle. And the thoughts of maybe this is not for me. But somehow you manage to get over these hurdles. And the reason I mentioned the seminary experience is because of some of the positive things that took place while I was there. For some reason I am not aware of, I was singled out to be the spokesperson for the attending group of African American students with the designated title of Papa Smurf. If anything came up about the African American students, I was the one called upon to be the go-between or to help advise the students. And the administration was very helpful to me personally, especially Bill Drake and Ruth Kitchen, who both taught me into staying at seminary because Professor and I could not see eye to eye, and I had made up my mind that I was leaving. But Ruth Kitchen and Bill Drake talked me into staying several times. Dr. Bell, who provided many, many hours of creative information about ministry, as he and I rode to and fro to St. Myride Seminary in Indiana to attend meetings. Dr. Bill Barr, who tried so very hard to counsel me because I had a problem with trusting. And then Dr. Jan Lynn, who got so tired of me bending his ear about why none of the white churches nor black churches would take black students so they could have an opportunity to practice ministry. Some cultural changes were instituted in seminary programming, such as revivals, the use of local choirs at the seminary, weekly African American student worship, prayer circles to meet the needs of the African American students, and many other changes. But it was good. It became a solace for us. It was tough for some of the African American students because they had to make major adjustments because they were not accustomed to that type of environment and that type of academia. But it was good. 1993, now we're going to the other side of racism. 1993, I was called to the regional staff on a part-time status as the African American consultant to interpret the issues and needs of the African American congregation to the region and develop and implement ways to consult with pastors and congregations. I was so excited about working with the regional staff and the opportunity to be a minister with churches in the Kentucky Christian Missionary Convention. Unfortunately, the KCMC was not happy to receive me. Had I known, it was to me a very large case of reverse racism and jealousy. They did not want me in their churches. They did not want me talking to their members. Even though the church I pastored was part of the KCMC, they didn't even want to fellowship with my church. It was just so weird. Guy and I met with the pastors, but we finally realized that there would be no happy solution. And so we decided to end the consultant position. To make it even worse for me, I started an elder deacon Bible studies for my members, and members from the association started coming to my church to attend these meetings. Then I was accused of stealing members and accused of heretic teachings. Crushed I was. That was not the way to start ministry in Kentucky and a new pastorate. But you pray, you cry, and you go on. 1996. The loss of income from the region over time and the loss of support from the national office and the church failure to support full-time ministry, it was time for me to look for other employment. So I found a position with the biggest employer in central Kentucky, University of Kentucky. Whew! When I got to the UK, you could just feel the racism. The tension was thick. There have been several racial incidents on campus among students, racial incidents within the workplace, and with persons who lived off campus. In the housing division in which I worked, racism ran rampant. There was even a group that was called the Nicholasville Mafia. I was new to the organization, so I was picked by the higher-ups to investigate a personnel complaint of racial harassment. And so once I started this investigation, no one wanted to talk to me. But as time went on, eventually there was a crack in the armor. This crack in the armor made some individuals very nervous. And so I began to receive threats. And I don't take threats very lightly. So I prepared just in case. Once the word got around that I didn't take threats lightly, the threats ceased. But I was pulled off the case. I guess because I had to voice my opinion about how backward and antiquated UK was. Personnel started a race relation program, and the department designated me to go to the first session. I knew it was going to be bad because the document sent prior to the class had a silhouette of a black face and a white face facing each other, like there are only two races on campus. Hello. So I knew it was going to be bad. Anyway, I went, and I don't have a poker face, never have. So immediately I was asked the question, what do you think of UK? YSB. It came right out because I was thinking it. And I said, it's a big plantation. Quiet. You could hear a rat run across cotton. If an employee called personnel, I said, to share what they are experiencing, looking for some assistance as how to deal with or respond to a situation, what does personnel do? They turn right around, call the person's supervisor or superior, and indicate to them that they have a disgruntled employee. In turn, the supervisor calls the employee on the carpet. Do you see why I call it a plantation? Secondly, I said, your performance ratings for employees have no meaning at all. UK rating system is something like I would rate kindergarten. UK system is based upon who you like, not on performance. My description of UK was not accepted by all, but both of these programs have changed since then. The race relation program was changed to diversity training, since hence has been changed now to humanity training. And I have attended humanity training. I was chosen to be on the committee that created the new performance report, now being used campus-wide, that's based on performance and merit-based. My boss, whom I care a great deal for and who is also a Vietnam vet, retired from UK, and I applied for his position. There was no doubt his bosses knew that I could do the job, because they were there one day to see me operate. I organized and unloaded approximately 1,200 cheerleaders out of several buildings, and by noon stacked 1,200 more into those buildings by using my friend's staff to wipe down those buildings in exchange. But when I got a call to tell me that I got the position, they failed to tell me that they had downgraded the position from a manager position to a specialist position. We had downgraded the monies from $54,000 to $35,000 per year. I was crushed, but that was more than I was making, and I needed a job. But I never stopped wondering. When I shared this with my boss, his response was, "You got screwed." But when I reflect on it, it reminds me of the story of Joseph and his brothers. If the downgrade was intended to harm me, God intended for good. I was able to continue to minister to that small congregation and maintain my livelihood. Maya Angelou said, if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. I don't know if I would have been a good foot soldier for Dr. King. There's so much pent-up anger inside of me over the years, not against any particular individual, but against systems that deny my existence. Systems that say one thing on paper, but operate entirely different in reality. My frustration with racism has been against this indivisible system where no one is blamed. The other thing about racism and that is so frustrating is how it defines my self-worth. My Bible says that I'm a child of God. So how can any man think that he has the power or authority to take that away from God? Dr. King wrote in his book, Where Do We Go From Here? He says racism can well be that corrosive evil that will bring down the curtain on Western civilization. If Western civilization does not respond constructively to the challenge to banish racism, some future historian will have to say that a great civilization died because it lacked the soul and commitment to make justice a reality for all men. 2004. I married the love of my life, who accepts me just like I am, to include all that you've heard this morning and more, who stood by my bed when I didn't know what day it was. She cleansed my body and she fed me because she did not know, nor did the doctors know, how much longer I would be here on earth. But I'm here at Central today because one of my former members said to me, instead of wishing me well after Daisy and I married, she said, you mean to tell me you couldn't find a black woman in this town? You had to go and find a white woman? hope she takes every dime you have. I never told Daisy, but I knew at that moment my pastorate at that church was over. She could not have been the only one that felt that way. So I keep praying, I keep smiling, and I keep singing, because I know the Lord didn't bring me this far to leave me. Thank you so much.